Okay, the message begins with verse 8. So, but fortunately, God doesn't grade us on our diet. We're neither commended when we clean our plate, nor reprimanded when we just can't stomach it. But God does care when you use your freedom carelessly in a way that leads a fellow believer, still vulnerable to those old associations, to be thrown off track. For instance, say you flaunt your freedom by going to a banquet thrown in honor of idols, where the main course is meat sacrificed to idols. Isn't there great danger of someone still struggling over this issue? Someone who looks up to you as knowledgeable and mature sees you go into that banquet. The danger is that he will become terribly confused, maybe even to the point of getting mixed up himself in what his conscience tells him is wrong. Christ gave up his life for that person. Wouldn't you at least be willing to give up going to dinner for him? Because as you say, it doesn't really make any difference, but it does make a difference if you hurt your friend terribly, risking his eternal ruin. When you hurt your friend, you hurt Christ. A free meal here and there isn't worth it at the cost of even one of these weak ones. So never go to these idol-tainted meals if there's any chance it will trip up one of your brothers or sisters.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate it. Some announcements at our planning meeting, which is the first Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. and it's same bat time, same bat channel every month, the virtual Vox. Please join us if you're interested, if you have questions, if you want to make some suggestions, or just hang out and see what we talk about. That would be awesome. We decided to make masks optional for in-person gatherings going forward as of now. It seems to be, although now we do have another surge. So we're just hanging loose and doing what we need. We would also really love to be able to meet in a place that has storage. If you know of a school, industrial place, a warehouse, or whatever that we could use on Sunday mornings that has storage, and of course we pay rent, that would be great. Update, we had Women's Night at the Yard House last week, and it was a wonderful time, which is super cool. Stay tuned for the next gathering for the women. It'll be on a Wednesday night this time. Also, baby update. Seems like in 2022, we've been on baby watch because there's been a lot of babies, which is awesome. The Allens are preparing for the arrival of baby number 3, so please keep them in your prayers. And we're planning on doing baby dedications in August, so just put that in your calendar. May birthdays, May 14th, Julie Steffen. May 20th, Ray Lajano. Also, we were supposed to have a screening of Kang Blue yesterday. That is KJ's short documentary. We were supposed to have a premiere yesterday on that, but we needed more time to plan. So stay tuned for details when we'll have that. It'll be like a Hollywood kind of premiere night. So that'll be super cool. And as I understand, it is family friendly. So upcoming Sundays. Next week, we have Bonnie Lewis teaching us again. And then on May 22nd, we have the one, the only Tim Gombas, who's actually going to be joining us in person. He and his wife will be here visiting. And then there are sign-up lists available at info@voxoc.com and on Life Around the Table, the Facebook page, which is a super cool place to go for all the information. That's where I get all the info first up. Okay, next up, we have worship and communion. And I'm not sure who's doing communion. Am I doing communion, Stella? Or are you sick of hearing from me already?
Never ever sick of you. Please, if you don't mind, lead communion, Joanna.
No problem whatsoever.
Yeah.
A high value at Vox is that we are around the table. We gather to commemorate the Lord's Supper. And this is something that binds us together with followers of Jesus around the world and has for millennia. It is the one great equalizer that we all share. And our communion is open. If you're a friend of Jesus, please join us. If you're not a friend of Jesus, please join us. If you'd like to know more about Jesus, please join us. If you just want to eat an Easter egg and have some coffee, please join us. But we do this as a tradition, and we do it every time we gather. We are going to be having a video from Bree, yes? Okay, and so thank you, Bree. That was so lovely. We sure are blessed to have not one, but two amazing people in our community who are able to lead us in the beautiful worship. Next step, we have our second scripture reading, and I think that's going to be Janelle.
Good morning. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall.
Thank you, Janelle. Next up, we are delighted that our friend Jordan Kwan, actually, he's a member of our community. He's more than a friend. Jordan and his wife were part of our community when they lived here in Southern California, and then they decided to up and move to Canada. But rather than abandoning us, they're still part of the community. We just are happy with the technology that we're able to have Jordan teach us from Canada. So welcome, Jordan.
Great, thank you so much, Joanna. Let me share my screen here. Let's go to screen sharing. Okay. All right, hi everyone. So I got some feedback that there may have been some concern in past talks that you weren't able to see me while I shared my PowerPoint slides, but hopefully now that there's an option to do that. Maybe that's already defaulted in each of your viewer screens, but if not, at the top right hand corner, you can go to the view tab or little button, and there should be some options to view the slides and the speaker or the gallery at the same time. So, you know, if that's anything that you guys are interested in, you know, check that out so you can see both me and the slides at the same time. If you have any questions or something, maybe just put something in the chat, and then maybe, you know, someone else can help address that. Okay. So with that said, first off, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there again. In true Vox fashion of doing something a little against the grain, this is not a Mother's Day talk per se. Nevertheless, we appreciate all of you mothers out there. I have no doubt that the amount of care, worry, and thoughtfulness that you have all devoted to raising your kids is far more than your kids have appreciated over the years. And one day, I'm sure, but you know, one day out of the year, I'm sure is not really recognizing you guys enough. So also a special shout out to my lovely wife Nat and her first Mother's Day as a mom. And here's cutie man Castian, who's woken up from a nap. Yeah, we're thrilled to have him, and I really appreciate how Nat's been extremely thoughtful with everything, of all the little details with our little guy there. So anyway, as always, I consider it a great privilege to be allowed to speak to you all again. Again, most churches don't allow us lay people to speak on Sundays, so this is not something that I take for granted. Today, we are continuing my ongoing and drawn out series on church culture. This is something that I plan to continue to talk about because I haven't ever really heard this kind of topic talked about in church, in all my years attending church. But I think it is a crucial aspect and a hidden topic that is vastly underappreciated. So to first recap our the past talks that I've had. In the past, I've talked about how every church has a culture, whether we notice it or not. This includes, churches that just say that, hey, we're just like a Bible, teaching church, and we don't really focus on anything else. Even that itself can create a culture of sorts. And besides direct teaching, I believe that, people learn and grow through the culture that they exist in. I think, in fact, most people don't even realize that they are, very influenced by their environment and their surroundings. So it's not even just, the direct teaching that we have. Also, a church's culture demonstrates more what people actually believe rather than what they might say that they should believe. This is essentially me arguing that I think how we actually learn and what we actually believe is more influenced by our culture than just direct teaching itself. So, this really underscores even more the importance, I think, of talking about the church culture, our church culture, and church cultures in general. Everybody in the church contributes to the culture, and nobody is solely responsible for the church's culture. This is to say that everybody, has the ability to be an influencer, and how we all contribute really does impact how each of us also grows at the same time. And in my last talk, I made the argument that Jesus is radical to all church cultures in some way. I gave examples of dominant church culture of their time, not just secular culture, but talking about dominant Christian church cultures over the years. And we explored a little bit about how dominant church movements still had flaws and did not fully reflect the love and nature of Christ. So if even these dominant church cultures are flawed throughout history, then it should stand to reason that there has never been and never will be any human Christian church culture that gets it completely right. That is, Jesus is therefore radical to all church cultures in some way, which will mean that includes even ours. Okay, so now that brings us to today's topic. What I would like to explore today is the question: what is the most foundational characteristic of a healthy Christian church culture, according to me? This characteristic very well, thankfully, and that's I think one of the reasons why we really like staying here and learning from each other here at Vox. So my answer is, based on the realization that Jesus is radical to all church cultures in some way, and with the assumption that we should want to strive to be more like Jesus, then it should inspire us as a church to practice humility, which is to say, since we recognize our church is not perfect, we should be open to appreciating what flaws we have and open to continually learning and growing. So what do I mean when I say humility? A classic definition of humility, even one that I found often in dictionaries, is that humility means being lowly or low in spirit or something like that. But I don't really think that this definition is helpful. I mean, what does it mean to be lowly? Like, how does that help anyone know what that means? So when I mean by humility is appreciating that we are not perfect and acting accordingly. This is also a definition that I found, but it was kind of buried in not one of the major definitions. But when I think of humility, I'm talking about, just having a more fair assessment of who we really are, including our strengths and weaknesses. So this definition here, it has to do with our mindset, that we have a certain perspective in mind, and also that we have our actions based on that mindset. I also found this definition of humility that I really liked. This is from source of a type of a Catholic encyclopedia. So true humility comprises the following behaviors and attitudes: submitting to God and legitimate authority, recognizing virtues and talents that others possess, particularly those that surpass one's own, and giving due honor and, when required, obedience, and also recognizing the limits of one's talents, ability, and authority. So this more detailed definition I like, because it describes a few more boundaries. So this includes submitting under God and legitimate authority. So that's an overarching kind of perspective. And again, I think this is fair because we recognize that we are not perfect. And if God is the supreme authority, then to be humble and to accurately describe where we fit in it all, we should, it is accurate and fair that we submit under God and also legitimate authority. It also recognizes, not just our limitations, but also our strengths. So, and we should do this in an accurate and fair way. So, for example, I can praise people who have great administrative talents. I really appreciate all the work that is done by all the Vox volunteers. Like these things, are necessary for us to just keep going as a church. And I think, everyone who is involved in this volunteering has done a great job. For example, I can also say, people have great artistic talents. I can say, for example, Stella is a great singer. Stella, you are a great singer. I can also recognize, when other people have other, talents and abilities that I don't have. And at the same time, this being humble means that we should also recognize our own shortcomings and our own blind spots. So humility, in essence, means to appreciate both our strengths and our weaknesses in a fair manner. So for further context, let's take a look at what humility is not. So humility is different from humiliation. We're not talking about letting ourselves be ridiculed or shamed while we are being humble. We're not talking about ridiculing or shaming anybody else either. I remember when it was like in high school at first, basically learned about the word humility, and I thought it was the same thing as humiliation. And it took me a long time to really kind of understand that there is a difference. And so, we're not here to prostrate ourselves, and we're not here to be doormats while we practice humility. This also means that humility allows us to also still, speak up for the marginalized, to defend people who need defending, and to, seek justice. It is also a fair thing for us to do, and not, just like let everything go, or just like, just let us be punching bags or something like that. Also, false humility is not real humility. I know it sounds so obvious when you put it that way, right, Jordan? But I'm referring to when people are overly fake in characterizing their actions or talents. So, like, for example, Asian culture does this a lot. Oh, it was nothing. When reality, you were slaving away, or secretly resentful how much work you did and no one bothered to help. Or like, maybe some Asian mom feels obligated to come up with some deprecating comment about their kid when their kid was praised by another parent. Oh, he plays piano so well. Oh, he doesn't practice that much. He could be so much better if he practiced even more. Stuff like that. False humility or false modesty is not real humility. I view it as, in fact, maybe a form of manipulation. And in fact, I would find false humility or false modesty to be unhealthy, because we can easily get on the wrong track by conveying inaccurate portrayals of ourselves or others. And third, just, full contrast, I think that the opposite of humility often is viewed as usually pride. And I think maybe we may even have a better understanding of what it means to be prideful. So if we're asking ourselves, what does it mean to be humble, or demonstrate humility in certain situations, sometimes maybe what we can do is just ask ourselves, what would be the prideful thing to do in a certain situation, and then what would be the opposite of that? And that might be a good way of looking at what does it mean to act and think humble. Okay, so with this understanding of what I mean when I say humility, why do I think humility is foundational for a healthy church culture? So the main reason is that if we are to grow in our likeness to Christ over time, and given the realization that our church will never be perfect, then we have to always have the mindset of recognizing not only our strengths, but also our weaknesses. If we think we have it all down and we understand everything, then that can lead us to failing to see our shortcomings or blind spots in certain particular areas. And so then when we fail to see those shortcomings or blind spots in that particular area, that would cause us to no longer grow in that area as a church. Therefore, in order for us to remain humble, to keep growing, we need to remain humble in those areas. I think maybe a lot of churches, focus on certain areas about being humble. Submitting to God is often, a certain standard value. But then I think in other areas of maybe many churches and, maybe our past experiences, we've seen how churches maybe think like they have it all down, for this other particular area. And they know like exactly what the right answer is. But, I think over time, what that leads churches to do is to fail to adapt, fail to see how maybe they could improve in those particular areas. And then that can turn off a lot of people. That can cause churches to fail to rise to a particular moment when, they had in the area that they had that blind spot, and then they can cease to be culturally relevant to people and cease to have an impact in those areas. So, if we want to continue to grow, I think we need to continually be aware of that we could have something wrong. We're not, fully thought about something over time. Psalm 25:9 says, "He guides the humble in what is right and teaches them his way." And Proverbs 11:2 says, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." So again, I think humility is foundational because then it allows us to grow in love, in justice, in wisdom, in knowledge, in truth, and all these other things, first by us being open to understanding our strengths and also our weaknesses. That's why I think humility is foundational. Maybe it's not the most important, but I think we have to have it constantly in all areas of our church. So now I want to offer one example from the Bible that sort of discusses humility. I wanted to look at a more church-oriented corporate example rather than like a character study from one individual. So my wife, Nat, reminded me of what I thought was a good example, and that is in 1 Corinthians 8, which is the passages that we've been reading here. So for context, in this chapter, Paul is addressing a controversy of whether it is wrong to eat food offered to idols. So this kind of food may have been thought to possess, special power or meaning or significance since it was offered to idols. Paul points out that since idols aren't actually real, the food offered to them does not, suddenly become imbued with any special power or whatnot. Nevertheless, he acknowledges that perhaps somebody new to the faith may not appreciate this yet. But Paul notes that love is more important than knowledge. So if eating the food would cause a fellow Christian to stumble, even though you believe it's totally fine, you should not eat it for the sake of your fellow Christian. Now, this passage has been, maybe preached on before. You might have been familiar with this passage in maybe a different context and, other sermons in the past. But what I want to emphasize here is that this passage demonstrates how Christians can disagree on issues, and this is clearly an example even in the Bible itself, which is to say that the Bible even allows for there to be, with certain issues, disagreements among Christians. It is fine. And, furthermore, it shows how we should be mindful of fellow Christians and sensitive to other people's points of view. I look back in past churches and, maybe others of us have also have experiences of where, there's a core teaching of Christianity. And then, a church maybe has all these different questions asked to them about, different little, subparts of doctrine in the Bible. What does the Bible have to say about this or that? And maybe it's not explicitly in the Bible, but a church and pastors feel like they have to find, clear-cut answers for people, but it's not necessarily that clear-cut in the Bible. Nevertheless, they try to do this. I think that is can lead people astray at times, where it's like, well, maybe the answers actually aren't that clear. And, these could be some examples in the past where churches may have, it might have been more beneficial to act more humbly in these kind of more controversial topics. Kind of similarly, I did want to also contrast and offer an example of a lack of humility in church culture. So the one that I picked can probably be seen as the very definition of lacking humility, and that is of Pastor Mark Driscoll of the now dissolved Mars Hill Church Network in Seattle. So from my reading and understanding, Mark Driscoll founded the Mars Hill Church in about 1996. He grew it to 15,000 people across 15 churches and satellite locations in and around the Seattle area. By 2014 or so, it had completely disbanded, essentially due to the arrogant and domineering attitude of Mark Driscoll. So my understanding is their numbers grew because of his personality and charisma. People apparently liked his blunt way of talking. People said he just had these instincts, particularly with how to connect to guys like him that didn't think that they were interested in churches very much. And it seemed to me that based on my reading, these kinds of people were attracted to his talking. His style was like he didn't act weak or he didn't act meek. He talked strong, blunt, domineering. But for that same reason, he prevented people from confronting his behavior by firing the staff who attempted to talk to him. So this arrogance ultimately led to the complete collapse of the Mars Hill churches. And my understanding is that they are dissolved and they've, people have moved on or worse. So, for example, Mark Driscoll has been quoted as saying, there was a pile of dead bodies behind the Mars Hill bus. By God's grace, it'll be a mountain by the time we're done. Either get on the bus or you get run over by the bus. Those are your options, but the bus ain't gonna stop. This was in reference to, people trying to, challenge him or confront him on kind of his style. He just ended up actually firing them. So these are the proverbial dead bodies that he's talking about. So from one of the sources that I read, at the same time, many former Mars Hill members in Seattle were so shattered by their experiences that they left Christianity altogether, while others found new churches. Some or others were quoted as like, why did we stay so long? It was like we were in a cult, and you just have this kind of a cult of personality. And, I think a textbook definition of a lack of humility in church culture. And this can lead to very damaging effects for people and for the church overall. So in terms of practical application, what are some ways that we can practice humility? So I've come up with a few different ideas. The first one is mainly about the attitude and perspective that we should have. As discussed earlier, our overarching view should be that our goal should be to grow in Christ and to recognize that we are not perfect. So here it's, again, remember that Jesus is Lord over our imperfect church, and he does not need our defense. So when I say he does not need our defense, I mean that we should not have the attitude that our church is, here to go on some crusade for God, as if we need to defend God's honor or name or something. God will still be God no matter what anybody says. So we don't need to get aggressive towards anybody in God's name or anything like that. I think that is not a demonstration of humility. I don't think that that is our place as a church. Second, a good tip that Nat gave me is that we should learn about ourselves first. Know thyself. So we can do this in a couple different ways, such as examining our own cultural upbringings and examining our own biases. A good example of this is she told me that when she was in college, she was in the InterVarsity Fellowship, and the leadership, comprised of mostly white Christians, suggested that they offer to clean people's dorms as a way of service. But to many of the Hispanic and Black students who were members in InterVarsity, this idea seemed more offensive because they were already viewed as servants or lower class. So for them to do this kind of seemed like it was more to might have been viewed as reinforcing stereotypes, negative stereotypes of them. So the leadership rightfully abandoned this idea, just getting that kind of feedback. And this is just like an example of how different cultural experiences can make the same idea look different to different people, even if well-intentioned. So this is just like, hey, if we examine ourselves and also just be open to how we may see things, and others just may not see it the same way, that can help us to be humble as well. Another thought I had is that, so from examining ourselves, then when engaging with other people, seek understanding. So we can do this by a few ways. One is by listening, active listening, trying to understand what others mean, not just sitting there and being quiet and waiting your turn, but really trying to understand. And also to ask questions before passing judgment. So we can ask clarifying questions, for example, in case we don't understand something, like, you mentioned XYZ. Can you help me understand what you meant by that? Or try to summarize something in your own words when you think to kind of reflect what you think they mean, so that you can ask them, so if I hear you correctly, I think you're saying this, did I understand you correctly, and so forth. Fourth, expressly give credit where credit is due. This can help us practice to think about others, and should also serve as a constant reminder that many people contribute to our own growth and success. And fifth, admit mistakes and take responsibility. So I think this part is really key, because when it comes to growth and in our church and just over time, the question is not whether, if a church will ever make mistakes. The question really is, what happens when we do? So often I think churches falter, not because something bad happened, but because of how the church reacted to the bad thing when it happened. We I think as a church, or many churches, strive to be perfect. You always have to be morally upstanding, but when that inevitably fails, it can become devastating, because we may lack a humility to take responsibility. So as a small example, I was leading a small group of one of our older churches, and I was looking at my phone a lot during some of our discussion time. And I got some anonymous feedback that it appeared that I wasn't paying attention. and it looked like I didn't care because I was looking at my phone. Now, the reality was I was actually looking at my phone because I had notes on it and I was just following my notes. But the point is that, it had this different impression. So in the next meeting, I apologized for what I did and I explained that, I could see how it may appear that I was aloof and disinterested, and, I cleared things up. And so I think that was taken positively. Anyway, so this, some small examples that we have the good faith attitude of, yeah, we are not perfect. And this requires us to also just, accept our mistakes, admit our mistakes, and take responsibility. Okay, so that's all I had. Thank you for listening to my talk. Just a FYI, I plan to continue this church culture talk. My next scheduled time is in August 2022. And there I will be talking what I view as the most important characteristic of a healthy church, and that is grace. Okay, so here are the discussion questions. And in Vox fashion, continuing our tradition here, we'll probably have like 15 minutes for just discussion questions in the breakout groups. As you read these questions, there'll be more text probably available in our discussion groups. But as you read them, I just want you to know, I swear, I set up these questions 3 weeks ago. Okay, if they happen to be relevant and contemporaneous today, that's I thought of these questions weeks ago. Okay, so thank you very much. And I guess, Joanna, I'll give that back to you.
Jordan, thank you so much. What a great reminder. And I really appreciate you continuing to discuss these issues with us and remind us of the basics, what it means to follow Jesus. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Looking forward to August. Okay, as Jordan alluded to, we will now break up into small groups. You will be sent an invite. You can accept or decline. If you want to go get a cup of coffee rather than participate, go for it. But I encourage even if you just hang and don't say a word. It has been, I believe, that the backbone of our strength as a community by being honest and vulnerable with those in our small groups especially. So. And if somebody could grab the breakout questions before you get assigned, we'll be back here in 15-ish minutes or so. And we're back. I hope your discussions were as good as our discussion we had.
Yeah, they were.
For people to pop in. I had true confession time. When we first started doing these breakouts, I wouldn't drop in. I'm like, I got some coffee. I don't feel like it. And even in person, I would go stand in the back of the room so I wouldn't have to talk. So okay. Now that I'm doing it, I wouldn't miss it. It's the highlight for sure. One of the highlights of our gatherings. So anyway. Next, we have our third scripture reading of the day, which will be Carol, and then Steve will follow and give us the benediction. So Carol, take it away.
Okay, 1 Corinthians 8, 9 through 13. This is the New King James Version. But beware let somehow this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to those who are weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge, shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? But when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble.
Thanks, Carol. And Steve, you're up.
All right. May the Lord bless and protect you. May the Lord's face radiate with joy because of you. May he be gracious to you, show you his favor, and give you peace.
Amen. Take care,
All right.
everyone. Have a good week. See you next week.
Happy Mother's Day.
Stay.
Happy Mother's Day.
Bye. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.